Facts, Part 69. A boy born with just 2% of his brain completely defied doctors' predictions after his brain grew back to 80% of the average size. Doctors had told the parents to terminate the pregnancy not once, but 5 times. The 8-year-old from England is the only known child to ever survive this condition. In order to keep Genghis Khan's burial a secret, all 2,000 plus people who attended his funeral were executed. The executioners were then killed by members of his escort, who eventually committed suicide when they reached their destination. 800 years later, the site still remains undiscovered to this day. Morbid Facts, Part 42. When 13-year-old Ryan White got AIDS from a blood donor in 1984, he was only given 6 months to live. Even though doctors said he posed no risk to other students, he was banned from returning to school by a petition signed by 117 parents. An auction was even held to raise funds to keep him out, and a local newspaper that supported him received death threats. The family was forced to leave town when a bullet was shot through the window of their home. Ryan outlived the doctor's diagnosis by 5 years, dying at the age of 19. Frank Goldsmith was a Titanic survivor who later lived near Tiger Stadium in Detroit. But he said he never took his children to a ball game because the roar of the crowd reminded him of the screams of people dying in the freezing waters. Morbid Facts, Part 9. Jake Thompson was home alone when he had both of his arms ripped off in a farming accident. However, he still managed to get up and dial 911 with a pencil in his mouth. He miraculously survived and both of his arms were reattached. For centuries, there was a paint pigment called mummy brown that was made out of the ground-up remains of ancient Egyptian mummies. The color was manufactured until 1964, when the supply of ancient mummies was finally expended. This is a photo of 2 engineers embracing for one final hug while standing on top of a wind turbine engulfed in flames. One of the men jumped to escape the fire, while the other one was burned alive while attempting to reach the staircase. Morbid Facts, Part 61. JFK's little sister Rosemary was born mentally ill, and the Kennedy family didn't want to be embarrassed by her. So they paid a surgeon to perform a lobotomy on her when she turned 23. During a lobotomy, the surgeon would shove a metal rod into the skull through the eye socket and scramble the frontal lobe. Rosemary was awake the whole time, and doctors asked her questions while they were cutting away at her brain. When she suddenly stopped verbally responding, they ended the surgery. Following the operation, Rosemary Kennedy was never able to walk or talk again. She was institutionalized for the rest of her life until she died at the age of 86. Morbid Facts, Part 24. In 1978, Charlie Chaplin's body was stolen and held for ransom, but his widow refused to pay ransom demands of 400,000 euros because she said Charlie would have thought it to be ridiculous. His body was found in a cornfield 11 weeks later, and the 2 suspects were apprehended. A woman in Florida once spent 6 straight years sitting on a couch. She died during a surgery that attempted to remove her skin that was grafted into the fabric. Frank Hayes was a jockey who suffered a fatal heart attack and died in the middle of a horse race in 1923. His body, however, remained on the saddle throughout the race, as his horse Sweet Kiss crossed the finish line ahead of the rest, thus winning the race. This was the first time Hayes had ever won a race, and the last. Morbid Facts, Part 103. The Scold's Bridle was a device that was used to publicly humiliate women until the 19th century. On the inside, the device had a metal plate that would press down on the tongue and prevent the wearer from speaking. It was placed on women who were said to be troublesome to keep them quiet and prevent them from gossiping. This is a powerful photo of a starving Ugandan boy holding the hand of a missionary in 1980. For many years, the lead singer of Lynyrd Skynyrd told his bandmates that he wouldn't live to the age of 30. His dad reported that even when he was a child, Ronnie would often say, "Daddy, I'll never be 30 years old." When his father asked why he kept saying this, Ronnie would just reply, "Daddy, that's my limit." Sure enough, when he was 29 years old, Ronnie Van Zant died in a plane crash. Morbid Facts, Part 5. After being diagnosed with polio at age 3, Diane Odell spent nearly 60 years encased in a 750-pound iron lung. She only died when a power outage shut down the machine that had been keeping her alive for decades. Do you know why you wake up right before you're about to die in a dream? It's because your brain doesn't know what it's actually like to experience death. In 1901, Madame Bobbin from England fell ill late into her pregnancy and was pronounced dead. But a few days later, one of the nurses was tormented by the idea that she may have been buried alive. After Madame Bobbin's father was alerted of this, he demanded that the grave be dug up immediately. When the coffin was open, he was horrified to find the corpse of a baby with an uncut umbilical cord laying between his now dead daughter's legs. Morbid Facts, Part 16. A Texas farmer found this astronaut helmet in his field following the Columbia disaster that killed 7 space shuttle crew members in 2003. Along with pieces of the shuttle and equipment, searchers in the debris field also found human body parts, including arms, feet, a torso, and a heart. This 3-person coffin was made for a Colorado couple whose baby died in the 1930s. Stricken by grief, they planned on committing suicide and being buried together in a single coffin. The coffin went unused when they thankfully decided not to go through with it. Today it can be seen in the National Museum of Funeral History. Apparently that's a real museum in Texas. Morbid Facts, Part 53. Frankie Muniz has had 9 concussions throughout his life and now suffers from severe memory loss. His condition is so bad that he doesn't even remember being on the TV show Malcolm in the Middle. According to ancient beliefs, birthmarks show how you were killed in your past life. A man named Michael Paul was on his way home from church when he decided to casually crack his neck like any other time. But afterwards, he suddenly started sweating profusely and then went pale. By the time Paul could receive medical care, he had already slipped into a coma. Soon afterwards, Michael Paul had died from cracking his neck. Morbid Facts, Part 14. A dead French girl ended up having the most kissed lips in history. In the late 1800s, an unidentified girl was pulled out of the Seine River in Paris after drowning. A pathologist at the morgue was apparently so taken by her beauty that he casted a plastered death mask of her face. This death mask would become the face of CPR Annie, the most widely produced CPR mannequin in the world. Heaven's Gate was a religious cult led by Marshall Applewhite. In 1997, they thought the earth was about to be quote-unquote recycled and that the only way to escape this was to die immediately. So naturally, they committed mass suicide. They believed that if they committed suicide, they would be transported to a spaceship following the Hale-Bopp comet. 39 people died, all wearing the same Nike shoes and covered by a purple blanket. Morbid Facts, Part 45. After 9/11, the rescue dogs searching in the rubble started to become depressed because they weren't finding any live bodies. Rescue workers started to bury themselves in the debris to trick the dogs into thinking they were saving people. It is estimated that just over 100 billion people have died on the planet to date. In 1971, high school student Juliana Kopka was sucked out of an airplane after it was struck by lightning. She fell nearly 10,000 feet still strapped to her chair and lived, only to endure an 11-day walk through the Amazon rainforest to the nearest civilization. She was eventually rescued by some local lumbermen and ended up being the sole survivor of the plane crash. Morbid Facts, Part 3. After being shot in the forehead by a drunk man and enduring an 8-year coma, policeman Gary Dockery suddenly woke up. He started talking enthusiastically, recognizing old friends and recalling events from past years. But by the very next day, he could no longer speak, and he slipped back into the same coma and never woke up again. In the 1980s, a family owned and operated a ceramics factory in California called Oscar Ceramics. But in 1987, the factory was revealed to be an illegal crematorium. This was only uncovered when a passerby, who happened to be a Holocaust survivor, recognized the smell of burning bodies from his time at Auschwitz. Morbid Facts, Part 96. In 2004, an Iranian girl was left blind and disfigured after a man threw acid in her face for declining his marriage proposal. In response to his crime, instead of paying money or serving jail time, the girl insisted that her attacker should have 20 drops of acid squeezed into his eyes. The Iranian courts ended up agreeing with the punishment. On average, about 12 humans are killed by sharks every year, but about 12,000 sharks are killed by humans every hour. In 1915, Essie Dunbar passed away after suffering from a seizure, and her sister was late for her funeral. When she arrived, the ministers had already lowered the coffin into the ground, but she demanded to see her sister one last time. Upon opening the coffin, the dead woman sat up and smiled. She lived on for another 47 years. Morbid Facts, Part 35. In a 1974 interview, NBA legend Pistol Pete Maravich said, quote, "I don't want to play 10 years in the NBA and then die of a heart attack at age 40. He played in the NBA for 10 years from 1970 to 1980 and then died of a heart attack in 1988 at age 40. This is a photo of a little African girl in a zoo in Belgium in 1958. The Oxford English Dictionary was mostly written by William Chester Minor, a schizophrenic murderer who cut off his own penis and spent most of his life in a mental institution. Morbid Facts, Part 109. Josephine Myrtle was born in 1868 with a rare genetic anomaly known as diphagus. Her body was completely normal down to the waist, but below it she had 2 pelvises and 4 legs. This is what toilets looked like in many medieval castles. There were a few cases of assassins climbing up these poop chutes and waiting for their targets to sit down before killing them. In 1977, the drummer for Lynyrd Skynyrd survived the plane crash that killed half the band. He then walked to a nearby house for help only to be shot by the homeowner. He apparently saw a bloody long-haired man and fired a warning shot that hit the drummer in the shoulder. Once Pyle shouted that there was a crash, the farmer helped him and he went on to fully recover. Morbid Facts, Part 1. Bobby Driscoll, the original voice of Peter Pan, became addicted to narcotics when his acting career failed as he got older. In 1968, 2 little boys got lost while playing in Manhattan's abandoned underground area, and they found Driscoll's rotting body. His body was surrounded by beer bottles, a religious pamphlet, and a wooden crucifix. He was only 31 years old. An elderly woman in the People's Temple cult at Jonestown took a nap before the community committed the largest mass suicide in modern history. She woke up to more than 900 dead bodies scattered around her. Morbid Facts, Part 59. The suit worn by the Cowardly Lion in The Wizard of Oz was made out of real lion skin and fur. Several lions were killed in order to make the costume look as realistic as possible. In 2012, a woman from New York donated her kidney to save the life of her boss. The boss then fired her when she took too long to recover from the operation. A British Royal Marine had a leg tattoo of Liverpool's motto, "You'll never walk alone." But after a major injury in Afghanistan, his leg was amputated. The surgeon had to cut the tattoo so it now read, "You'll never walk." Morbid Facts, Part 121. Masabumi Hosono was the only Japanese passenger on the Titanic, and he managed to survive the sinking. But after returning to his home country, he was publicly condemned and lost his job for not going down with the other passengers. President JFK's brain has been missing from the National Archives for more than 50 years. Stanley Meyer was one of the first to invent a car that was completely powered by water. He claimed that it was capable of traveling across the country on just 72 liters of tap water, which would have revolutionized the auto industry and made gasoline obsolete. But shortly after creating the car, Stanley died while meeting with investors. His brother said he ran out of the restaurant choking, looked at him and said, "They've poisoned me."